Sleepovers were always better in the summer when I was younger. That was always the time of year when we either got to stay out later or sometimes even go backyard camping, which meant staying out all night. Now, backyard camping might sound fun and seem harmless considering you stay on your own property or on your friends, but there's still a lot that can go wrong. I learned that the hard way when I planned a small camp out with 3 friends of mine, Nick, Henry, and Andrew. We set up 4 single tents and placed them all around a small fire pit that my parents set up a few years before, and at first, everything was awesome. We played a few yard games while the sun was up, and as it went down, my parents had a small barbecue for us followed by s'mores. On paper, it was the perfect summer night. But as the night continued and my parents went inside, things slowly started to change. We decided to tell each other some urban legends that we had heard of, and sure enough, one by one, we each freaked each other out and started to actually get the creeps. Eventually, we decided to cut it out with all the urban legends and tried to lighten the mood by talking about some shows that we were all watching at the time. And even though we all acted like we were fine, I could tell that we were all still a bit on edge. After a while, we all started to feel a bit tired and decided that maybe it was time to get some sleep. I sprayed the hose on the fire to make sure that it was out, and then one by one we all went into our respective tents. It was quiet for the first few minutes as we all tried our best to shut our eyes, but my brain was still going a mile a minute thinking about the stories that we were telling each other earlier. That was when I heard Henry whisper from his tent, "Hello?" I wondered who he was talking to, but then he whispered again, "Guys, do you hear that?" In unison, we all answered no and wondered what Henry was talking about. But as soon as we finished talking, we heard the sound of footsteps walking in between our circle of tents near the fire pit. I tried to calm everyone down by telling them that it was probably just my dad, and then I called out hoping that my father would respond. But there was no answer, and the sound of footsteps was gone. I called out for my dad again, and again he didn't answer. That was when I heard the sound of whoever it was walking again, only this time, they were headed right toward my tent. I heard the sound of the tent material crinkling, and I held my breath as the zipper started to open up. I let out a loud scream as a head popped into my tent that I didn't recognize. Instead of being my father like I had hoped, I was staring into the darkened eyes of an elderly woman that I had never seen before. The sound of my scream clearly upset her as she quickly crawled into my tent, lunging toward me. I kicked and pushed her back as I tried to scramble away, but there was no place for me to go. The woman grabbed onto me and began matching the sound of my screaming with her own as if she was mocking me. The more I looked into her eyes, the less human she seemed to be. It was like her mind wasn't there. Thankfully, the sound of all of us screaming in the backyard got my parents' attention, and my dad rushed out to see what was wrong. He grabbed the woman and pulled her out of my tent as he yelled for my mom to call the police. The police showed up and ended up arresting the woman, who we found out had some form of dementia. She apparently had gotten out of the home that she was in without the nurses realizing it and wandered more than 2 miles until she found my backyard. It wasn't often that I was allowed to have friends over at my house, but whenever I was, we always had a blast. There was only one exception, and that was on a night when my mom and dad weren't going to be home until very early the following morning. That was actually the only reason they agreed to let me have my friend Oscar over. It was because they didn't want me to be by myself at night. And there's a good chance that decision saved my life. It was a bit of an unusual situation because my parents typically had alternating work schedules, with my mom working during the day and my dad doing overnight shifts. But my mom had to cover for a coworker that night, so neither of them would be home until around 3 in the morning. Oscar took the bus back to my house after school let out, and when we got there, the first thing we did was start making some ramen to snack on before we started playing some games. We played a co-op game that the 2 of us started the last time he came over, and as always, the time began to fly. I remember looking out of my bedroom window and being surprised that it was already getting dark out. I asked Oscar if he wanted to have some dinner, but we decided to keep playing for a little while, and again, we lost track of time. We probably wouldn't have eaten at all that night if I hadn't heard a strange tapping noise coming from the kitchen. It was while we were playing, but I could have sworn I heard a tapping noise coming from the kitchen, and I thought that maybe the sink was dripping or something. So I told Oscar that I was going to grab us something to eat while I checked out what the noise was and made my way into the kitchen. As I walked through the hallway, I expected the noise to get louder, but instead, it was as if the strange tapping just stopped. I listened for it again as I entered the kitchen, but when there was nothing, I decided to start making some sandwiches for us. As I was getting the plates out of the cabinets though, I was surprised when I heard the sound of the handle on the back door moving. I looked over to the door, which was in plain view of the kitchen, and I could clearly see the handle shaking as if someone was trying to open it. My eyes grew wide and I began struggling to catch my breath as panic began to set in. The handle stopped moving as if whoever was on the other side of the door had given up, and I slowly started to make my way back toward my bedroom. Oscar saw the petrified look on my face and asked me what happened, and I explained to him that someone tried to get into the house, but before I could say anything else, we both froze as we heard the sound of the front door slowly creaking open. I stared at the hallway from my room, wondering what was going to happen next. Everything in me was telling me to close the door, but I couldn't find the strength to move my feet. Thankfully, Oscar didn't hesitate and quickly crossed the room and quietly closed the door before locking it. "What do we do? What do we do?" I asked. It was like fear was keeping my brain from forming a single solid idea. I grew quiet as I heard the sound of loud footsteps walking around the front of the house. I looked around my room hoping to find the answers, and that was when Oscar signaled to me that he had his cell phone. It really was good that Oscar was there because at that point, I wasn't old enough for my parents to justify giving me a cell phone. They said I could just use the house phone, although that all changed after this incident. Oscar used his phone to quietly call his parents, though looking back on it, he should have just called the police. His mom answered the phone and we told her that someone was in the house with us. She thought that we were joking at first, but as the intruders slowly made their way toward my bedroom, she could hear that the fear in our voices was real. They made it to the other side of my bedroom door and began trying to open it before realizing that it was locked, and in that moment, we couldn't help but scream. That was when Oscar's mom told us that his dad was on the phone with the police and said that we needed to get out of the house. We both looked toward my bedroom window and quickly rushed to it. We had to pop the screen out, but we were in a rush, so we just kind of forced it off and quickly made our way out of my room and into the backyard. Oscar and I ran through my yard and into my neighbor's before rushing up to their back door and banging on it as we screamed for help. I looked behind me toward my house, and I swear I could see whoever it was that had broken in staring at us through my window. But before they could do anything, my neighbor answered the door and let us inside to explain what was going on. We let her know what was happening, and then Oscar handed his phone to her so that she could speak with his mom. We both waited there until the police arrived, and then shortly after that, Oscar's parents picked us up and brought us back to his house. The next day, my parents explained to me that someone had broken in and stolen a bunch of their jewelry and stuff, but the police were unable to find the intruder. I'll admit, it was hard sleeping in my own bed for a while after that, but we never had another break-in, so all in all, it could have been much worse. I had just turned 13, and at first, I thought I wasn't going to spend my birthday with my friends because my parents had made plans to visit my aunts and uncles that week. Thankfully, my friend Mikey's mom offered to let me spend the weekend there so that I could still have some fun, and my parents agreed. Looking back on it, I wish I had gone with them though, because then maybe none of us would have been in danger that night. After my parents left that first day, I dropped my backpack with some clothes off at Mikey's, and then we went out and met up with everyone else. For a while, we just played some kickball and walked around the park, but as day turned to night, the real fun was about to start, or at least that's what we thought. Once it was dark enough, the 8 of us in the park divided into 2 teams of 4 and started playing our first game of Manhunt that year. Now for anyone who might not know it as Manhunt, it's basically just hide and seek at night, only instead of a single seeker, you have an entire team. We preferred it that way because that trailer park was pretty big, and we would hide throughout the entire thing, so the more people searching, the better. I was on the team that was hiding first, and we ended up playing a few rounds. But as the night went on, some of us started noticing some strange things as we moved around the trailer park. By that point, it must have been around 11 p.m., and while hiding, my friend Derek and I were hiding in a tree toward the entrance of the park, and we noticed a panel van pull in that we didn't recognize. We watched the van as it slowly drove down the main road of the park, which was when we noticed Mikey and a few of our other friends who were seeking us. The van started to slow down even more as it got closer to the group of seekers, and I knew that something was wrong. Derek and I started to climb down from the tree as we noticed the van came to a complete stop. The passenger side door opened up, and I don't know why, but something compelled me to yell out to our friends, "Watch out!" I saw Mikey look over to us as I yelled, and then he noticed the strange van. I was happy to see that he, along with the rest of our friends, quickly began running through the yards in the trailer park back toward their house. What I wasn't happy about was the fact that Derek and I could now see that the van had started to reverse and drive back toward us. We both took off running through the grass, but before we could get into one of the yards and away from the van, it stopped. This time, the passenger jumped out and started running onto that grass and in our direction. Derek and I continued running as fast as we could, and now with each step that we took, we were yelling out for help. All we could do was hope that we either got back to Mikey's house or someone else heard us and came outside before the man chasing us caught us. I looked back over my shoulder as I continued to run, and just as I noticed the man was getting closer to us, my right foot slammed into the side of a small box in someone's yard and I fell down. I tried to use my momentum to roll forward, but it was too late. I felt the wind get knocked out of me, and the man jumped onto me and tried to grab me while I was prone. At that moment, I was horrified. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. Thankfully, that was when I heard the sound of a door opening up. The owner of the trailer whose yard we were in was a man named Mr. Brenner, and normally he was the last person that you wanted to see, but I couldn't have been happier. Mr. Brenner yelled at the man to get off of me as he rushed down the stairs. Thankfully, the man listened and let me go before running back out of the yard and toward the van. Mr. Brenner helped me up and then brought Derek and me over to Mikey's house before having his mom call the police. We reported the van, but because of how dark it was, we could only give a very vague description. That was the only time that I ever felt like my life was in danger in that trailer park, but it's surely something that I will never forget.